Welcome back to Be a Better Leader. I'm Dr. AJ Lee, a manager of customer success and learning implementation strategist at FranklinCovey, the world's most trusted leadership company. Today, we're going to explore practical tactics for managing the emotional reactions and conflicts that often arise during times of change. Joining us again is Barbara Cogburn, a FranklinCovey senior consultant and lead consultant on our newest training, Navigating Difficult Conversations, Turn Tension into Progress. She's also a Marine Corps vet, leadership trainer, facilitator, and coach for the military, government, and global organizations. Barb, it's great to have you back on the show.
Hi, AJ. Good to see you again.
Yes. So as we get started, Barb, we're going to dig and dive straight in thinking about those emotional reactions. So when we are navigating through various points of change and just conversations with our teams, why do we feel, or why have we seen that emotional reactions and conflicts tend to escalate, specifically in those times of change?
Yeah, that's interesting too, thinking about that. There's a couple components to this. People can kind of get hijacked emotionally. Anything that comes up that becomes emotional, your brain gets hijacked anyway, right? And so it goes, this is emotional, I don't like it. Your brain goes into survival mode and you're not operating fully and you're not thinking, completely in a balanced way. But then when you're in a period and a time of change, maybe organizationally or even personally, then you're kind of accelerating that again. You might have this kind of low-grade undercurrent of change, moving things around in your life, and that also hijacks you. So you've just accelerated all that change, and your brain really kind of goes, I need to survive this change. Even though there really is no reason for that anymore, that's just how your brain works. And so you're just accelerating all of this brain kind of hijacking. And so you're just not thinking clearly. And that's why you get the kind of poor results people can kind of get into for change and emotions that kind of can show up. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So when a leader sees those sticky situations that come up, just organically, for all the reasons you've mentioned, how can they start to effectively evaluate the situation and then manage through those and lead through those situations?
Okay. Well, and I was thinking about this too as we started today. It's interesting in the change content that we have, we talk about talking about that before it comes up, right? Like we talk about going, hey, change is coming. This is what it should feel like. Don't forget, it will make you feel uncomfortable, and that's really natural. But if you're an organization that hasn't really gone back and done that for a while and you got caught in it and you went, oh no, you're right, we're in the middle of this and we've just whipped up all this emotion, that's okay too. Just be cognizant that is normal. And I think that's the conversation to have. Is everybody feeling it? What's that like? How long has it been going on? Don't forget, we just started creating change. Everybody wants to kind of come back down to equilibrium and settle down and go back to where we were. And that's not what's going to happen for a while. And this is going to be normal. So let's talk about it, decide what that can look like, and then see how we can navigate this a little bit better. But I think just having the conversation that this is a normal reaction, it comes up, unless it's so severe that the behavior is impacting people in a really, I'm trying to think of when I've seen people react so negatively, and I don't think I have lately, but it's kind of that just normal, oops, we don't like it. We're not behaving in the normal way, but it could be so severe that some people are behaving really poorly and impacting people on their team or things in a very, very negative way, then that would have to be addressed slightly differently.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I love that you mentioned just being able to acknowledge this is normal.
Yes.
To validate the emotion that they're feeling and allowing them the space to just sit with that for a moment and then starting to guide them through it. I think that's so powerful to consider. And I know that for my team, I manage a team as well. We recently navigated through some changes, and that was one of the things that I aim to do as well, thinking about, okay, as soon as this is announced and shared, let's go ahead and take a moment as a team where they know I have an open Zoom ready because we're a virtual team, right? Mm-hmm. If you want to jump in, It's one-to-one when you pop in the room, but I'm here,
Yeah.
right? Making sure that they have space to share feedback, all of those things, that their reaction is valid and that it's normal to be feeling different types of emotions as you hear different types of news. So that's such a good point.
Yeah, that's great though.
Yeah. So when leaders are seeing some of those maybe more challenging behaviors in specific team members, is there a approach to the conversation where they can start to identify the root cause of what's happening? What would you share with them in order to resolve that resistance that they're feeling?
Yeah, I think that's the big thing too as a leader. I always find this interesting when people are struggling in a team dynamic. I think that is something that as a leader, you don't let that go. The minute you see it where people are struggling, one, if I don't address it, it says I'm not paying attention. So that's, I think, for me. But two, the minute I see it, they're impacting the rest of the team. And the team doesn't say anything to you, but they're going, Barb, you need to say something about this. You need to fix this for us. That's your job, right? So again, timeliness is probably really important. But I think that's when we pull people in and say, hey, let's talk about what's going on with you. And I usually like to start with, is there something, do you want to share? Do you want to start with me? And if they're like, no, I'm fine, I'll say, okay, well, let me just ask you this. Lately, it's been different. What do you think the impact of the different behavior is on the team right now? And I'll just start with kind of an open awareness question. And that usually will get people going, oh, darn it, I guess I am not hiding this well. And I'm not trying to go, oh, let me just, get you, aha. It's more like just self-awareness. What do you think? Do you think people are seeing it or feeling it? And just think about it a little bit. And if people evade me, I'll go, I want you to give this some thought because it's happening. And we need to preserve some credibility for you right now. And I think there's some unintended consequences showing up. So let's kind of work through this and see what we can do because there's something going on. And I think it's time to address it and talk about it. And just trying to create that safe space for people. And if they're not ready, I usually, again, just give people a little bit of space and time. Say, think about it. Come back and talk to me tomorrow. Because I think we need to address it and do something different because I don't want this to impact you and your credibility. As leaders, you have to address it. I have seen people wait too long and people's behavior and their emotion has impacted the team in really negative ways. And that's your job to manage that. So,
yeah. Addressing it head on, then prompting with coaching related questions that allow them to think outside of themselves, right? Think along the lines of the broader impact of their actions, I think is really important.
Yeah. And AJ, most of the time too, if you just say, hey, what's happening? Most people do want to be acknowledged and you don't usually have to go, they usually don't hide it, but sometimes they do. So, I think most of the time you'll get some kind of response, but if you don't, then you've got another option for sure.
Yeah. Oh, we're so good. So good. So if we're navigating through different types of emotions, right? And on the opposite end, if we want to foster more positive interactions with our teams in the midst of these circumstances, of course, we don't want to act like the challenge doesn't exist. Yeah. And we want to be mindful that two things can exist. Various emotions can both exist. It can be challenging and there can be points of celebration. So how would you recommend a leader manage the ebb and flow of those various emotions when trying to create their full team culture going forward through these types of changes?
I think those are great. That is such a great question because again, we talked on a previous episode about talking about this through whole processes, right? Where change elicits all this, emotion too. There are just times when there's check-ins right along the way. What's going good? What are we excited about? Like what is occurring that's exciting in this change? And letting people just kind of share where they're having successes with each other so they can see that there is some progress in there too, right? I think the other thing is I was talking to a client yesterday about the amount of, we were talking about change and we were talking about when we start change because there's so much of it, like how do we let people stop doing something, right? Like you cannot onboard all this change and not stop something. And we were talking about the gift of getting to say no to something. Well, there's celebrating in that too, right? So there's all these points along the way, even though change can be hard. There's little celebrations. Yay, the just say no list, as we like to call it sometimes. Then there's these things that went, wow, this is working so much better now that we've got this up and running, and having those celebration points. But the team, when you guide that discussion and let them kind of guide you on what's good and what's working, that's their effort, their progress, their success. And you're just facilitating that conversation. Again, we're letting them show their work and getting to celebrate that with them. I think that's what's so important, because they're the ones doing the heavy lifting for us, you know. And that's just part of being in the conversation along the way. Otherwise, if we're not in that conversation reminding them, they just put their heads down and keep going. And that's when they get tired. And that's our job, not to let that happen.
Mm-hmm. Finding those moments of celebrating. I love what you mentioned is celebrating the no, right?
Yeah.
Because on the other side of the no is a yes to something, something that matters, that is important. And we have to really manage our time and energy.
Yeah.
That is fantastic. So from a leader side, thinking self-awareness and their responsibility on the other side of the coin. We've talked a whole lot about how we support our team members through these things. But when a leader is faced with a challenging reaction and situation, how can a leader maintain their own composure and EQ when they're trying to have this type of dialogue? Are there any strategies or tactics that you would recommend?
Yeah, I'll give you a handful of things. Obviously, we're in this business, so I kind of come back to some things. More and more in our space, and you know this, we're finding that the number one thing leaders will tell you is what makes me successful is just the awareness of how I show up as a leader, right? And who I am. And so I always think about my credibility is based on how I lead people. And at some point, my technical ability may have gotten me so far, but boy, my leadership ability starts to shift and become more important. How I speak to people, how I listen to people, how I engage a team, and how I have these leadership abilities. And I think to some degree, the more self-aware I am about how I'm deploying those abilities and shifting those from my technical ability and the balance of the two, then I'm always using them better and I'm a more effective version of myself. And the other thing that I think I have the benefit from teaching 7 Habits all these years is I always think back to the maturity continuum. And there are times in my life when I've ran into things that I went, I wonder how I should approach this. I'm not sure what to do. I'll think to myself, Barb, what's the highest level of professional maturity I can approach this with? And I think the maturity continuum. And sometimes that one little sentence will just go, okay, wait a minute. I have tools in my toolkit for this. I can elevate what I did last time, which was, it was okay, but I think I could do it better this time. And sometimes that one little sentence makes me think about what I'm doing, because what I say and how I say it helps my team members build capacity and resiliency. And I want nothing more than to build their capacity and help them grow in their position. And so how I show up and how I work with them and say things and help interact with them is a huge impact on what they do. And so I think about that a lot, like, how do I do that as a leader? So a little bit lengthy, but does that make sense where I'm going with this?
No, it makes total sense. And you said it towards the end when you mentioned like what you do impacts your team's ability to build their capacity.
Yes.
And the intentionality that has to come in order to think through the maturity continuum. And for those that are not familiar, definitely let us know. We'd love to share more about the model and the framework and those types of things. But I think it's so important when a leader is able to take a step back and consider just the bigger picture of what they're aiming to accomplish and their credibility in their role, which is what you started with, which is so important.
Yeah. And coming back to some more of our content and that difficult conversations too, an easy place to start too, if you haven't been exposed to a lot of this, is your intent. What's my intent in this situation? It's one of the quickest, easiest ways to get so focused on what am I doing here? And I don't even have to go back into this maturity continuum framework. it grounds me going, wait a minute, where am I at with this? So there's a couple tools that you could start with that really help you as a leader get focused and show up as a much more elevated version of yourself as you grow with all those tools. So there's many things that we can do, but yeah, it's just thinking about your professional maturity and that growth and that self-awareness. It's so important, I think, for us.
Yeah, absolutely, Barb. And you've had, just years of being able to coach and guide and lead others through these types of situations. So is there one last piece of advice or encouragement you might give a leader as to what the other side looks like once they build this culture, once they've navigated through these challenging emotional reactions? What would you say to them? What would you say to encourage them to keep doing those great things and growing?
Yeah, gosh, I don't know. I don't even know if this is the answer, but I'm going to tell you what I'm thinking anyway.
Please.
I go to work with my team when I own a team. Every day I go to work and I think my job is to get you to your next best place. And every day my thinking is, how do I help you become more resilient, have more capability, and bring your best talent and skill to work. And I think if I can do that, then I'm doing my job and I'm helping you grow and get where you want to get. And I think my growth helps me help you every day at work. And if you can get there with your folks, or whatever your version or your flavor, I like to say, of that is, then I think you're in a good place and you're able to transition yourself to a leader that you're really, you're helping people transition into their best version and show up and using their talent and skill, then you're in a good place.
Thank you so much, Barb. And I wanted to go there and really hear your perspective, because I think a lot of times when we talk about difficult conversations and all of the emotions, it gets us in the thick of things. And even emotionally, as we're reflecting, we can lose sight of the positive side from having that intent, understanding the motive, and really navigating through those conversations to that other positive side of building that resilient team. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Barb, thank you so much for just your time, your expertise, and for sharing with us today.
Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure to be with you again. Thanks, AJ.
And for listeners interested in learning more about your approach to communication styles, you can download our free difficult conversation assessment tool. You can find a link in the show notes or visit FranklinCovey.com for additional resources. Thank you all so much for joining us. Till next time.